Good evening, everyone. I'm Brian Trumbore with your nightly review for Monday, March 25th. It's 4:01 Eastern Time. Dow Jones finished down 61 points to 14,450, or minus 0.4%. S&P lost 5 to 1551. Earlier in the day, it was within a point of its all-time high of 1565 before backing off. NASDAQ lost 9 points to 3235. Gold 1603, oil 94.50, up 80 cents. And the 10-year Treasury with a yield of 1.92%. The markets were rocked during the day, up and down, by Cyprus. Uncertainty surrounding comments related to the bailout. More on that in a second. Led to a lot of volatility in the European markets that were up big early. And then London ended up down 0.2%, Paris down 1.1%, Germany down 0.5%, but Spain's stock market lost 2.3% and Italy's 2.5%. But first, early Saturday morning around 5 a.m., the Democratic-controlled Senate approved its first budget blueprint in 4 years. Now it is forced to deal directly with the Republican-controlled House. The vote was 50 to 49, 45 Republicans, all 45 voting no, along with 4 Democrats. Coincidentally, Baucus of Montana, Begich of Alaska, Pryor of Arkansas, and Hagan of North Carolina, all 4 of those are red states, and all 4 are up for re-election in 2014. The Senate package calls for $1 trillion in new taxes over the next decade. Deficit would soar another $6 trillion. House Republicans, of course, earlier adopted an anti-tax spending plan that would balance the budget by 2023, leaving the national debt about $4 trillion less than the Senate plan. So with these two extremes, a House-Senate conference will be assigned the task of coming up with a compromise. It ain't gonna be easy. Paul Ryan and Washington Democratic Senator Patty Murray will be the lead negotiators. Ryan has said Republicans need changes to entitlement programs before agreeing to raise the debt ceiling. That issue will come to a head by August. Separately, the Senate voted 62 to 37 in support of the Keystone Pipeline, though that is non-binding on President Obama, but it's a signal. In Italy, President Napolitano told the center-left leader Bersani to try and form a government. Bersani needs help from Beppe Grillo's anti-establishment Five-Star movement, but Grillo has consistently said he won't vote in support of any government led by a traditional party. Bersani refuses to form an alliance with Silvio Berlusconi. Napolitano can bring in an outsider to head a government, but analysts seem to think a weak government will eventually be formed because all parties except Grillo's are afraid to go back to the polls. With Grillo's momentum, he could win an outright majority. Napolitano, a stabilizing force in Italy, finishes up his 7-year term this spring, and Parliament must elect a new president. Okay, Cyprus. We learned last night that there was a bailout agreement, but the banks in Cyprus remain closed. At last word, the two banks that are being bailed out specifically wound down. I'll get into specifics. Laika and Bank of Cyprus are remaining closed now until Thursday, but the others are supposed to reopen tomorrow, Tuesday. We will see. The Troika, the IMF, European Central Bank, and European Commission are in total disarray. They had major disagreements throughout this whole process. Accounts under 100,000 euros, the insured limit, are to be protected, but details are still being worked out. It would seem accounts over 100,000 euro could suffer losses anywhere from 30 to 70%. When the banks reopen, there will be strict capital controls. Parliaments in Germany, Finland, and the Netherlands may hold votes to approve loans to Cyprus from the European Stability Mechanism. That's the 500 billion euro rescue fund. Cyprus Parliament passed banking laws last week, which means it does not have to vote on this bailout. So a deal was reached allowing Cyprus now to receive bailout funds from the EU. Russia, it is estimated, has $30 billion in Cypriot banks. Of course, they would suffer major losses on their non-insured accounts. Again, markets worldwide were up, and then all hell broke loose, in relative terms, when Joran Dijsselbloem, the Dutch finance minister involved in the Cyprus negotiations, he's the lead of the 17 Eurozone finance ministers, said the deal represented a new template for resolving future Eurozone banking problems, and then said other countries may have to restructure their banks. Specifically, he said to the Financial Times in an interview, if there is a risk in a bank, our first question should be, okay, what are you in the bank going to do about that? What can you do to recapitalize yourself? If the bank can't do it, then we'll talk to the shareholders and the bondholders. We'll ask them to contribute in recapitalizing the bank, and if necessary, the uninsured deposit holders. So in essence, what is taking place with the two largest banks in Cyprus, in theory, Dijsselbloem is saying could happen anywhere. This would mark a radical change since the crisis began 3 years ago. For example, in both the Irish and Spanish banking sector rescues, which were similar to Cyprus in that massive bank failures risk plunging the governments into bankruptcy because of huge bailout bills, several categories of private creditors, particularly senior bondholders and uninsured depositors, were untouched. Controversially, in Ireland, taxpayers were forced to pay off senior bondholders in Anglo-Irish Bank. European Central Bank and other Eurozone officials were reluctant to go after any private creditors other than junior bondholders for fear of exacerbating the flight of investors from the Eurozone. Dijsselbloem acknowledged that there is still nervousness among some of his fellow finance ministers about the approach and whether it would scare off private investors. He noted this fear that led officials to try first, last week, 2 weekends ago to impose a levy on Cypriot bank accounts under the insured limit, rather than forcing the island's two largest to close and then be restructured. But he said the investors' skittishness could ultimately make the financial sector healthier. This is still Dieselblum talking to the Financial Times. If I finance a bank and I know if the bank will get in trouble, I will be hit and I will lose money. I will put a price on that. I think it is a sound economic principle. Dieselblum said the shift also made it far less likely that the Eurozone's 500 billion rescue fund, the European Stability Mechanism, would ever be used to directly capitalize struggling banks. But that was the policy that was agreed to just 9 months ago. So it was rather confusing today. Asked what the policy shift meant for countries like Luxembourg and Malta, which, like Cyprus, have large financial sectors compared with the overall economy, Dieselblum said, "It means deal with it before you get in trouble. Strengthen your banks, fix your balance sheets, and realize if a bank gets in trouble, the response will no longer automatically be, we'll come and take away your problems." Well, the markets were tanking after these comments came out. So an aide stepped forward and said Cyprus was a specific case with exceptional challenges. Ratings agency Moody's warned in a release Sunday night before the bailout deal was announced that whatever happens is going to have a lasting negative impact on the Eurozone. Moody's said specifically, even if negotiations are successful and Cyprus remains within the euro area, policymakers' recent decisions raise the risk of deposit outflows, capital flight, increased bank and sovereign funding cost, and broader financial and market dislocation throughout the euro area in the future. For his part, Russian President Vladimir Putin surprisingly said, this is through his chief spokesman, Mr. Peskov, considering the decisions taken by the Eurogroup, President Putin deems it possible to back efforts by the Cypriot president as well as the European Commission aimed at overcoming the crisis in the island nation's economy and system of finance and banking. More specifically, Russia seems amenable to agreeing perhaps to a 5-year extension of this €2.5 billion loan it had extended Cyprus before, and it would cut the interest rate. However, Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev said that Cyprus's plans to tax uninsured deposits, those over €100,000, amounts to theft. That's a similar statement to what he said last week. Today, he said they're continuing, I think, to plunder the loot. That was Medvedev. Under the outlines of the deal, depositors, again with accounts worth less than €100,000 would not be touched, but those above those levels in the Laiki Bank, that's the second largest, would be severely cut. And that's where we don't know if it's 30, 40, 60, or 70%. The losses on large deposits in Bank of Cyprus, that's the largest, and Bank of Cyprus is going to survive as a separate, smaller entity, have yet to be decided, but could be as high as 40%. Laiki Bank has €4.2 billion in deposits over 100,000. So it's that 4.2 billion that's going to get whacked. Both junior and senior bondholders in Laiki will be wiped out. Unlike the original deal signed a week ago, only large deposits in Laiki and Bank of Cyprus will suffer losses. We're still getting some of these details in here. From the Lex column in the Financial Times, Cyprus is still in the Eurozone, yet with its shuttered banks, angry people, and an economy facing disaster, it feels like a departure. Cypriots are furious. Their attitude is, while the Greeks were bailed out without any tax on their bank deposits, Cypriots are going to lose part of their savings. Olli Rehn, the European Commission's economic chief, said the week-long upheaval was expected to deepen Cyprus' recession. It's clear the depth of the financial crisis in Cyprus means the near future will be very difficult for the country and its people. Thousands and thousands are going to lose their jobs. Many Cypriots believe a deal will be punishing whatever the final details because the country's offshore financial business, the engine of its economy, will be destroyed, of course. And that's going to cripple its ability to repay the bailout loans. If the international business goes, how can you come out of this big hole, said one Cypriot financier to Bloomberg. So that's the deal on Cyprus. In Syria, the opposition chief, Khatib, announced his resignation from the national coalition, throwing Syria's divided opposition into total disarray about 2 days ahead of an Arab summit. A summit in which Arab heads of state were to decide whether to give Damascus' vacant seat in the Arab League to the opposition, and then suddenly Khatib, who is well respected, decides to resign. Said one official of the opposition, the coalition is on verge of disintegrating. It's a big mess, I'll say. Xi Jinping, China's new president, made a statement in a 3-day trip to Moscow the other day. He said, "We must respect the right of each country in the world to independently choose its path of development and oppose interference in the internal affairs of other countries." He's not naming the U.S. by name, but he's certainly implying that the influence of the U.S. and NATO needs to be lessened, and that we should leave other countries alone. And of course, it's China and Russia that have been blocking a lot of moves in the UN with regards to both Iran and Syria. Well, that's all for today. I'll be back with you tomorrow, Tuesday. Tiger Woods won today at Bay Hill in the rain-delayed event, his 8th win at Bay Hill, tying him with Sam Snead for most wins in a single event. Snead did that at Greensboro, Greater Greensboro Open. And I hope you all had Florida Gulf Coast or are at least enjoying their ride. Take care.